And they can't argue that their hands are tied in some way because they could eject her. They won't, but they could. And so they're keeping her around for the purpose of potentially being able to use her to do whatever it is they want to do legislatively, which completely, in my view, delegitimizes the entire institution of the Senate, the state Senate here in Minnesota. But they're willing to do that because, and again, context, we're entering the last month of the second year of the term under a trifecta. They've already accomplished the lion's share of everything they could possibly want. Like, this just seems to be a combination of arrogance and like foot stomping tantrum that we've got to keep her around. I mean, they lose practically nothing legislatively by getting rid of her, and yet they won't do it. It's astounding to me that they won't take this step.
The Hudson-Mekeland podcast.
So, 9:30 this morning, apparently, I was just seeing on the old X that one of the assistant minority leaders or majority leaders in the state Senate has indicated that, in spite being slapped on the very, very tip, not even like the wrist or the top of the hand, but on the very, very tip of her fingers, Senator Nicole Mitchell has been removed from her committees. Oh no. And removed from caucus. Oh no. But she is still going to be able to vote and be the deciding vote in a 34-33 majority on consequential legislation that affects 6 million people in the state of Minnesota.
That's what you read out of that?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I read? We're going to play duck and cover. We're going to keep her out of the areas where she can be caught by media. Mm-hmm. We're going to keep her away from any committee. We're going to keep her away from caucus.
Yeah, so she can't be questioned.
And then nowhere in that statement did it say anything regarding to voting. It did not say that. I did not see where it said we're going to allow her to vote remotely. They didn't even touch it. So what they really did was this played the hand saying, we're going to keep her away from the Capitol, mm-hmm. so that then we don't have all this, drama going on. Because can you imagine? Okay, for those that don't understand, our caucus rooms are on the opposite sides of a hallway.
Yep.
That it's a wide hallway to it, a significantly wide hallway. That area would be filled with media if they knew she was going to be there.
True.
So if they know she's now been banned from going to caucus, mm-hmm. and which also the other part is funny, how many committee hearings do you have in the upcoming week?
0.
Because they pretty much wrapped them up.
Right, exactly.
So, I mean, it sounds good, because we're going to prohibit her ability to participate in committee hearing.
Yep.
Which she is the vice chair of one of them. Uh-huh. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she would have been put on conference committee, because those are coming.
Yeah.
But when I read it, I'm going, it's really interesting, the words they did use and the words they did not.
Yeah.
Because nowhere in there did I see anything regarding her ability to vote mm-hmm. on the passage of bills on the Senate floor, no matter what they are.
Well, at the very least, the absence of explicitly saying she will not be casting deciding votes on legislation, like not saying that means you're keeping the gun in your holster.
You're keeping the options. Funny you say gun in your holster, because 4300 is coming tomorrow. For those who don't know, 4300 is the safe storage bill.
Right.
Which means
the Burglary Enabling Act, as I call it.
Well, and I think I texted you yesterday about that. That was actually, I don't know if I like the word enabling, but the Burglary Protection Act. Because that way, if you burglarize somebody and that somebody wakes up in the dark of night and they try to find something to defend themselves with, they have to trip over you first, and they have to go to one safe to get one thing and another safe to get another thing, figure out how to assemble it, all coming out of the dark of sleep,
Uh-huh.
And I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting We can't use props on the house floor. If we were to take a Louisville Slugger bat, which some people keep in their bedroom, better than nothing, right? And you cut it longwise, so it's like quarters, and then you chop it all up, and then hand them a bottle of Elmer's glue and a roll of duct tape.
Right.
You have to put this together before you can use it. To protect yourself in the middle of the night when you're an elderly person.
When you're tripping over somebody who's hiding in your room.
On the floor.
Yeah.
On the floor.
Yeah.
Isn't that an interesting thought?
It is. It is fascinating. I mean, and this is the thing: is it seems as though the strategy that's being employed here by Democrats in Minnesota is to be able to create some sort of plausible narrative that they're actually taking action in response to what Senator Mitchell did, while not actually taking off the table the idea that she's still going to have an impact upon the legislation that affects Minnesotans, and they can't argue that their hands are tied in some way because they could eject her. They won't, but they could. And so they're keeping her around for the purpose of potentially being able to use her to do whatever it is they want to do legislatively, which completely, in my view, delegitimizes the entire institution of the Senate, the state Senate here in Minnesota. But they're willing to do that because, and again, context, we're entering the last month of the second year of the term under a trifecta. They've already accomplished the lion's share of everything they could possibly want. Like, this just seems to be a combination of arrogance and like foot stomping tantrum that we've got to keep her around. I mean, they lose practically nothing legislatively by getting rid of her, and yet they won't do it. It's astounding to me that they won't take this step to put the story to bed, because that's the thing. You eject her or she resigns, you push her into resigning. The story diminishes. We close out the end of session with, God forbid, bipartisan legislation that's relatively non-controversial. They can still, to their people on their side, they can still go around claiming that they've done all these amazing things that, in the view of all normies throughout the state, is absolutely reprehensible and taking our state in a terrible direction that's going to make it unlivable.
Well, right, but and they passed most of it in 2023. They've even passed more, which many of us were kind of going like, you had your agenda in 2023 and you went sweeping forward. Like, how much more, because you had everything fixed, and then also there's all the fixes to what they didn't fix, or what they did fix, they had to fix that. We've had several of those. And now we're at a point where, for whatever reason, they're clinging to this opportunity, should they need it, for something. You know, and they could easily, I mean, if you think this through, they could go Sunny Day.
Yep.
They could, her party could ask her to resign. She could do so. The governor could call a special election. They could handle all that. They could have the special election. And then he could call a special session and bring us back before the election.
Right.
He could literally do all that.
If they really wanted to.
If they really wanted to.
Right.
And then as you watch this play out, because the next court date's June 10th,
right,
which will be the arraignment, where Senator Mitchell will either plead guilty or not guilty, and then they'll set another court date, you know, probably a couple months later, is kind of the typical flow that we see, and then it'll keep like playing out all year long as they go through this, because I don't think she's going to plead guilty. Based on her public statements and her lawyer's statements, I don't see that she's going to plead guilty. So I don't know how long do you want this to continue on?
Right.
And that's the part that amazes me, because they could literally put this like away and not make it look so like partisan, if you will, but at the same time, they're just pushing forward with this when it's not a good look for the entire institution. I mean, the legislative institution, there's, do we have latitudes we can use? Sure. But at the same time, if you have a respect for the institution of what it is, I mean, we've seen, since you've been elected, some attire worn on the House floor because the House has a much more casual standard for attire. But what's been allowed last year and this year is far beyond anything that I saw my first 4 years.
Yeah, in terms of political messaging.
Well, yeah, lettered up shirts or ball caps or all that stuff. I mean, it's a little bit more casual in the Senate. You must have a suit and tie and pants and all that, a jacket, a sport coat, whatever, sport coat and slacks, just to get on the Senate floor, to go visit your senator. I mean, they have very strict standards. And while the House has been more casual with it, they don't even care. Like, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about a political party that has as a definitive component of its constituency people who unironically talk about dismantling institutions. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that they have no respect for the legislative institution. I mean, really the only thing they care about is being able to flex their power to get what they want, like children. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I mean, this is an attempt to try to, again, I think, create a plausible narrative that they're taking this seriously, when at the end of the day, they're not showing any actual respect for the institution whatsoever. I mean, you point out the steps that they're taking her off committees and whatnot, are completely for show. They have no actual legislative impact or effect whatsoever.
Well, no, because the committees, they've all pretty much wrapped up. So now there's conference committee, but even if you're in that committee, nothing guarantees you're going to be in that conference committee. They can pick anybody from the committee members from each side of the aisle. So that is like non-consequential because they could pick anybody else. So really what they did is they just made it a blanket going, yep, she's not going to be here for any of this and any of that. And they didn't even address the ability, because they do still, post-COVID, they have remained the opportunity to vote remotely, both in the House and the Senate. And that's what they're likely, we'll see. To me, which it looks really interesting, that how it's theatrics is what they did or done.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. And I think it's really kind of the Safe Robbery Act instead of the Safe Storage Act, which would be really what it comes, safe robber or whatever you want to call it, because to be caught in a person's bedroom by the person who, from all reports I've heard, I mean, I don't have the specific age, but clearly not a young person.
Yeah.
Older than the senator, from everything I've read. And
her stepmother, so married to her father.
But one of her public statements was she's known this stepmother for like 40-ish years. Based on her statement. So, and I believe the senator is 49. So that means that this woman's the stepmother has been a part of her life for a long time, one way or another. So you're in the bedroom, laying on the floor, trying to not be noticed because you might have heard a little kerfuffle going on in the bed, whatever the heck they were going for, who knows. I mean, that'll all come out in the future, but it just, it looks bad. I can only imagine, what this is going to look like on the floor tomorrow, because why the House went ahead with the Safe Storage Act.
It's so tone deaf.
Like,
it's amazing
to especially at a time when this is such a big story that's being heard nationwide, and you literally put somebody by Senator's own admission, she claims that the stepmother has Alzheimer's and some mental episodes, and that's what she was there for. So why are you laying on the floor? And her attorney put out a message saying that she has a key. So why didn't you use it?
Why didn't you use it? Yeah, exactly.
Why would you go through a very small basement window
and
then like a 7-foot drop to the floor? whichever window you picked for however reason, I don't know, but why won't you just go knock at the door and go, mom or stepmom or whatever, however your relationship is,
Right.
going, are you okay? I'm here to check on you.
Well, and I don't know.
Dress all in black, put a black hat on.
I might have to reference the particulars of the law, but I have to imagine that, let's say in the alternative universe where she did use the key, and then everything else was the same. Clearly, you're trying to evade detection by entering the home. You have admitted that you were there to retrieve property that does not belong to you and that you have no legal claim to. It's still unlawful entry, whether you have a key or not.
But if it was solely for a welfare check, then A, you don't go in the middle of the night.
Right.
B, you don't plan and wear all black.
Right.
And including a black hat. And put a black sock on a flashlight of some sort. That's all in the report.
Right.
So there's a lot of planning here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the reason for all this, there's a lot we don't know, mm-hmm. but there's a lot of questions to be answered in the coming days.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if they allow her to vote, she's going to be voting on restrictions on the Second Amendment mm-hmm. that could greatly impact somebody that she just put her stepmother into mm-hmm. a position and prohibit them from defending themselves
right.
in a timely manner.
Yeah, it would be like if a senator or any legislator had been arrested for domestic abuse or domestic violence and then was turning around voting on legislation that made it more difficult for a victim of domestic abuse to either defend themselves or to prosecute that crime. I mean, the conflict of interest is glaring, and yet they're moving forward with it. So it's completely tone deaf. We had a number of endorsing conventions this weekend.
I've been watching that.
What are your thoughts? So let's go down the list. So CD2, Taylor Rahm wins CD2. What do you think?
He won it handily with 70% of the vote in the first ballot.
Yeah.
What I see, and from what I've heard, the competitor was Joe something. I don't know.
Joe Tayreb.
Tayreb?
Yeah.
And he was kind of the one that was being put forward by the more established folks.
Correct.
And initially they both had given their word that they would abide by the endorsement.
Right.
To which a week or two ago, Joe came out and said that he has changed his position on that.
Yep.
Which, if you ever run for office or you follow politics, that meant they knew their numbers were not good. That's mm-hmm. why they did it.
Yep.
And the fact that Taylor won handily with 70% mm-hmm. on the first ballot mm-hmm. Suggests that Joe's numbers were right with what their team was getting. Mm-hmm. And so he's given himself the opportunity to take the next try at it in August in the primary.
Right.
Which is going to spend a tremendous amount of money between the two of them, mm-hmm. rather than spending the money against the Democrat Party.
So that's all of that is true. From a cold, and I'm not making any value assessment here or moral judgment here, but from a cold political analysis, Taylor Rahm has like 1/10 of the money that Joe Tayreb has raised. And so, and the amount of money that he does have has been characterized as him basically being out of money. Like that's how little it is.
Correct.
So, I mean, when we talk about the spending of money in a primary, you got to have it to spend it. Is he going to get it?
That I don't know. And if his base that supported him, the 70% that all were there, can they make up for the machine that's backing Joe?
Sure.
I quite frankly doubt it.
Well, and that's just it. So this ongoing conversation that we have about the grassroots versus the establishment, one of the points that I keep trying to make to the underdogs, to folks who are trying to push back against the powers that be, is that there's no substitute for doing the things that make elections work. Raising money, knocking on doors, getting ballots in boxes. Like, you're not going to be able to, through sheer angst, overcome those hurdles. Now, it is true that money isn't everything. I mean, Democrats outspend Republicans all the time, and Republicans still win in a lot of contests. But in this case, I wonder to what extent unless all these folks who endorsed Rahm are going to turn out and start door knocking like crazy and, having fundraisers and raising the money necessary to combat the ads that are coming. And we know what they're going to say, right? Because he's already been saying it, talking about how Taylor Rahm is defending, the worst of the worst in the criminal underworld and all of this. For folks who are like relatively, primary voters are not really apolitical by definition, but certainly the broader primary electoral audience is less engaged than the folks who show up to a convention. And so to the relatively uninformed primary voter, Joe Tayrab spends his 10 times stockpile of cash war chest on making Taylor Rahm out to be some sort of poison pill. I don't know how it's going to sort out, but it's certainly not good for the November election. That's for sure.
Well, and that's the whole thing. And then we, it's interesting that Taylor had so much support from the people, the delegates, but so little financial support. Mm-hmm. And then for these delegates, which if you look at the actual numbers, how many voted, the attendance, whatever. Mm-hmm. So even if they each gave $1,000, it's not going to amount to enough,
right,
to counteract the machine that is behind Joe. Mm-hmm. And we kind of saw a similar thing in CD7 where there was no endorsement.
Yes, that's the next one I was going to bring up. So this is Michelle Fischbach
current
versus
sitting congresswoman
Steve Boyd, I believe is the name of the challenger.
So.
Yeah, and it's similar, but it's also different. It's an interesting districts to compare and contrast because in one case you're dealing with an incumbent, Fischbach.
Correct.
Who is regarded by many, apparently, of the grassroots persuasion as not being conservative enough to represent the district. And yet the counter argument to that is she flipped the district. Like it was a Democrat district.
Democrat district for 30 plus years with Colin Peterson.
Yeah.
29 or whatever it was. He was there for a long time.
Yeah.
And she was the first one that successfully flipped it. And then if you look at, we have 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats in our 8 congressional districts. She has, her voting record has been on the conservative side on many issues where some Republicans have not steadfast.
Yeah, well, and again, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out because the no endorsement actually, I think, is worse for Boyd than it is for Fischbach because Fischbach has the built-in institutional support.
Correct.
She has the momentum going into a primary. She has the name recognition. In order for Boyd to overcome that without an endorsement, so that's another one of the differences between the Rahm situation and the Boyd situation is that he doesn't have the endorsement to provide any sort of hypothetical boost going into a primary. And so I would say it's on... If I was a betting man, I would say that I would bet on Rahm before I would bet on Boyd just for that reason alone.
I would agree.
So,
and that's where it's just interesting watching, what's deemed as a blue state, and then you watch these battles go on within the conservative side, and it's just interesting to watch how different people perceive what should be done. Mm-hmm. Like for example, so the financial reports came out, I think a week ago, in CD5, and Don Samuels, who challenged Ilhan Omar last election cycle, he came within 2 percentage points, and he raised a lot more money than people thought he was going to. And she raised quite a bit of money, like 4 point some million, but she's already spent over half of it. But just since October to current, he's raised $775,000. So would it not be prudent to tell all your conservative friends, donate $5 to Don Samuels.
Oh, right.
And people say, was he a conservative? No.
Right.
No, I wouldn't agree with him on anything. Well, why should I give him $5? Because he's way nowhere near like Ilhan Omar.
Yes. Right.
So you're moving the needle back like 3%, maybe 4%, maybe 5%. I don't know. But do you want to keep going like further the wrong way, or do you want to start drawing it backwards?
Well, and the utility of sending the signal that if you operate the way Ilhan Omar operates, you're not going to be able to survive politically. Like sooner or later, somebody's going to come for you and they're going to take you out, even if it's a fellow Democrat. Like the utility of that would send a signal to the squad and to all observers that you can't just keep going and ratcheting further and further left. There is an operational limit past which you're going to get pushed back.
And that is my point, that if people ask me, would they vote the same? I said, yeah, probably. Well, so then what's the point? I'm like, because some people do a lot more ratcheting up the temperament of the public.
Yeah.
And the rhetoric they put out and the firing up of the like these protest groups.
Yes. Yeah.
And they become very divisive. Mm-hmm. Where others, they may vote the same way, but they respect the difference of opinion from the other side. I mean, look at Dean Phillips for crying out loud. While he's never said anything bad about Biden, but he thinks it's time for somebody younger, and that's why he attempted his presidential campaign. So he's kind of trying to say it in a nice way without saying it, but he has a respect for the other side, and it doesn't just turn it all into, I don't know, stuff to amp up the crowd, the base, whatever, into what. I mean, if you heard what Ilhan said yesterday at the university that she was at, and it was almost to the point where she'll tolerate the, I'm paraphrasing, the Jews should not be being targeted depending on whether they're pro-genocide or anti-genocide. So it was kind of a backhanded compliment of support, like only if, I don't know. It was an odd comment. It's recorded. It's over.
It makes no sense. Genocide of who? Like who is being alleged to be the victim of genocide by Israel? You're Gaza and Hamas are not a distinct ethnic group, right? Like if you're even in the hypothetical, and nobody's advocating for this, but even in the hypothetical where the entire population of Gaza was eliminated, that still wouldn't be a genocide in any sort of ethnic or racial or religious sense, because you're surrounded by other nations that share those distinctions, which is one of the crucial points that is continually overlooked, is that Gaza shares a border with Egypt. They're not taking in all these folks who we're supposed to feel so sorry about.
Correct. And while it's a very complex thing, but it's listen to the words that are said by those that support one side or the other.
Yeah.
And, there's plenty of stuff out there that says you can believe all this over here on the pro-Palestine side, pro-Hamas. But why aren't you talking about there's still hostages from October 7th?
Right.
And where is the compassion for those human beings?
Right.
And somewhere that seems to be getting lost in the shuffle. Mm-hmm. And then there's propaganda that you don't know what's real or what's not. You don't know when they show these bloodied up dead bodies. You don't know who actually did. They can claim one thing or another. I mean, we see this with all countries. That they make a claim, and then 4 months later, it slipped into a 8th page of a paper going, it was determined that it was actually the other side. But nobody knows that. So it's a matter of what's real and what's Memorex. Mm-hmm. Or propaganda. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Real versus Memorex is kind of an old line from...
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Back when I didn't have gray hair.
Let's talk about... There was an interesting cultural story that came out this week. I saw it on Twitter. I tagged you on it. And that's the revelation... that, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to be able to quote it verbatim, but roughly 25 to 30% of men under the age of like 30 are not having sex, to put it bluntly. I mean, they're just described as Though I think the specific data point was report having not had sexual relations with a woman since turning 18. And that's up from an average going back historically that kind of oscillated between like 6% and maybe 8 or 9, like a really low. And it's about triple over the course since 2008 was the pivot point where it started to really kind of shoot up.
Yes. And what's also interesting in that is the demeaning of the male.
Yep.
Is part of it. Post COVID, there's many research papers showing sterility that both males and females, just a lot of what went down then with largely probably the injection has sterilized a lot of people. Plus the social distancing. I mean, you just learn to like be alone and accept it because we said you had to.
Right.
You know, if you think back, I made this as a joke back then, but and it wasn't a ha-ha joke. It was like a serious joke. But after the restrictions started to lift a little, we were on a walk in a state park. It was another family and ours, and so the girls kind of got ahead, and so it was just the guys hanging back, and the other father asked the boy, going, you met anybody? You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But there were still the spacing requirements were still in place, right? And he was kind of giving them like that, hey, you getting any kind of thing. And I'm like, and I looked at the other dad. I'm like, dude, I don't know anybody who's got 6 foot something, so I don't want the attorney general coming after him for violating the executive orders right now. And with that, the other father like fell over. He hadn't even thought about it. I mean, he literally like fell down laughing. Because at the time, Attorney General Ellison was going after people if they violated even the simplest of little executive orders.
Yeah.
Mask mandate or what have you. And now we're so beyond that we know better. And the school lockdowns, the mask mandates, the social distancing, the isolation of the children, kids not being able to watch lips when they're learning how to read or talk or what have you, and all the negative effects this has had. And then just think about, like, if you, come on, we were both there. You're whatever age you decide, you decide somebody's cute. You can't tell if they're smiling because they got a thing on their face. You can't tell if they're giving like a smile versus like, nobody knows. Because all of the things, communication is not just verbal. It's all the body language you read, like eye movement, a smile versus a frown, whatever.
Yeah.
But all that was taken away from all these kids.
Yep.
So I think all that plays together in part, but also the demeaning in the if you're masculine, you're bad. You're really bad.
Toxic masculinity. There's no counter to that. Like, it's only toxic masculinity. There's no toxic femininity that's talked about anywhere in the culture.
Well, and then you don't have, on top of that, you have this push for the whole transgender thing.
Yeah.
Coupling into that.
Yeah.
And I think there's a hidden thing going, so we can't judge based on if somebody happens to be a little thinner or a little overweight.
Right.
We can't say that, but at the end of the day, that's what some women want.
People like what they like.
And but so it seems like we've forced a lot of people into hibernation.
Yeah.
Out of fear of rejection. We promoted so for 40, 50 years now, bullying bad. All I've seen in the last 10, 15 years is promoting bullying from a different direction.
Yeah, of certain categories of people.
Well, it's now coming from the administration.
Yeah.
It's coming from way up above instead of the kids.
Yeah.
It's literally, they're telling kids, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it's okay if you are not good in that activity. We're still going to give you a trophy anyway.
Right.
Which takes away from the one who really worked hard to be the best.
Yeah.
And we see that in girls' sports now. Their trophies, their records are being stolen by dudes who claim to be a chick.
Right. Exactly.
So what incentive is there for a girl going forward to strive and thrive, to push themselves, to become the best at whatever it is? I don't care what thing it is. What incentive is there for that? So it's dismantling the social fabric of human society is really all it is, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't disagree at all with the impacts that the pandemic has had on people's psychology and the development of especially young people when it comes to their social skills and what have you. But this goes back to 2008.
Correct.
And what I see as a potential low-hanging pivot point there is social media. The extent to which social media, because that's about the time it started to become prolific, was in 2008. I mean, it's only become more prolific since then. And along with that has come this rise in the wokeism and critical theory and all the things that you're talking about.
Right.
And I think what the totality of all of that has conspired to do, including the COVID stuff, is it has completely upended the risk-reward analysis that any given male in particular has to take into consideration when they do find somebody attractive, right? Because think about it. It's no longer like it used to be that the risk reward, like the risk that you were taking on is that she was going to laugh in your face and tell you no.
Right.
Right? Like that was the worst thing that could possibly
And especially
happen.
if it did it right in front of your guy friends, or if he did it in front of her girlfriends.
Right. Now, the risk that you're taking on is you're going to be accused of sexual harassment. You're going to be Me Too'd. You're not going to be able to get a job. Your reputation's going to be destroyed because on the whim that they didn't like the fact that you approached them or the way in which you approached them. And then even beyond that, like let's say you have a successful initial interaction, you start dating, things are going well for a period of time, and then all of a sudden something happens and it goes kaput. Like what we've created is we created a situation where there's like this self-destruct button that a woman can push at any given moment that has a 0-second fuse that completely obliterates the dude. So whether you're talking about dating or you're talking about a more serious relationship, certainly marriage, the overwhelming majority of marriage or divorces are initiated by women. Women are heavily favored in custodial situations. They tend to come out on the better end financially from a divorce than a man does. And so young men, and this isn't just my speculation, like I have young cousins and I talk to them, and, because I got married when I was 25 years old, which seemed old at the time to me. And now that's like really early compared to today. I've got cousins who've gotten married at like 35, like 10 years after I did, and are just starting to have kids. I mean, you've burned up. If that's what you're doing, you have burned up at that point a solid 15 plus years of your most fertile and productive life duration.
Correct.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
and not only that, but look on the other end, 20 years later.
yeah.
They're, whether they go into a career or go into college or whatever they do, you are now 10 to 15 years older.
Right.
And not as viable if for like retirement, for example, because now you got to work longer because you still have all the expenses.
Yep.
And so there's a lot to take in to all that, and it's not necessarily the wrong thing. I mean, I was one of those, actually. I would have been in my mid-30s when Sammy was born. Mm-hmm. And thus I'm in my mid-50s now.
Right.
And so it's things that each person takes into account on their own, but the fact that they're too afraid. I actually had this conversation with Andrew years ago. It was during the Me Too movement. He's like, how do I ask somebody? I mean, like, what do I do?
Well, and
like, without getting accused.
Correct. And here's what the only acceptable answer has become. Swipe left, swipe right.
So that's interesting left. You say that, because that's true. And then on top of that, so you said, like how the culture has pushed it where, a female can hit that nuclear button at any given moment.
Yeah.
Well, so too now can a man pretending to be a woman.
True.
I mean, we've seen it.
Yeah.
Numerous times.
Yeah.
You can't say that about me. I'm a woman. Like, okay, well.
Right.
So now it's just a claim.
Yeah.
And there's no way out of it in the court of public opinion by many, because despite what you see, despite what you hear, I mean, deep voice, big dude, yeah, okay, I get it. It's wearing nail polish and lipstick and colored hair and a skirt or a tutu or whatever the hell they wear. But even at that, everything about it's a big dude. Mm-hmm. But you're supposed to say it's a she. Mm-hmm. So they can take major offense to that. They can claim anything.
Yeah, for sure.
And we see it on social media all the time. So, going back to the 2008 theory, social media is unfortunately the ability for every person to hear every voice, whatever they may be, from anywhere at any time. Mm-hmm. So isn't it interesting in the development of the humankind, best we all know history, that intentionally people had different languages?
Yeah.
So they couldn't communicate.
Right.
Unless you took time to learn the different language, right? Mm-hmm. But that way, I guess, if you look at it, especially now, we see it now, if there's a bad mental thing going on over here in this language, it can't infect this one over here. Mm-hmm. And it was
cultural bulkheads.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's reasons why things were the way they were, apparently, but that's not where we're at anymore.
No, and that's just it, is that we are not, and it goes beyond social media, but social media has definitely accelerated it. We were not designed to be consistently aware of so much at the same time. Like, you just look at like our natural, regardless of your religious or secular view, whether you think we're the product of millions of years of evolution, or you subscribe to the idea that God created us and a young earth and all that, none of that even matters. To this question, at least, our nature as human beings is such that we are designed, we are programmed to deal with what's in front of us, to deal with who's in the room, who's on our block, what's up to the horizon, and nothing else. And we're currently living through a moment where every single person, at least in the first world, is keenly aware of everything that's going on anywhere in the world at any given time. You roll out of bed, you pick up your phone, and you're inundated with Gaza and protests on campuses and elections and fires and all these tornadoes now.
Tornadoes in Oklahoma.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, and the brain is not designed to process all of that. And then you carry that stress into your relationships. We just live in a time that it seems like it's all kind of falling apart. Because here's the other angle on this. It's not just people like my cousins who are getting together later and later, if at all, with another person to start a family. It's also the consequence to the system, which is designed around the idea of the perpetuation of the human species, Social Security.
Well, and pensions.
Pensions.
They have to be backfilled to sustain, the young have to sustain what the old like accumulated.
It's a Ponzi scheme, and...
But it has to happen. And you go back to 2008, I think that'd be pretty close, 2008. I'm trying to think here. 91. Even back then, like, amazingly young people, particularly men, were not getting driver's licenses. They weren't in any hurry to.
Right.
They didn't care.
It's weird.
And they didn't get them for, like, dude, like, the first chance I could get, like, my freedom.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
And my daughter was that way. Like, hey, she, like, as soon as she could get out, she was out. Mm-hmm. If she wants to drive to her friend's house.
Yep.
But But there was a period in there where like, yeah, doesn't matter. And then I think that was millennials. And then all of a sudden it was, well, that's not fair. Cars are too expensive. Well, they were expensive when I was a kid too. Well,
Yeah.
but they only cost this much. Yeah, but minimum wage was only that much.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all relative.
Right.
But so I mean, yes, there has been and I am of the opinion that we went from this anti-bullying thing, then we went to everybody gets a trophy no matter how bad you are, and then we transformed into, I shouldn't say trans, into you can pick your gender.
Right.
And so like nothing's reality anymore. It doesn't matter how bad you are at tennis, you still get the grand champion. And like where's up and where's down and black, white, left, right, none of it matters anymore. And you can just pick and make new words too. Hey, we can just redefine a word. And that we see that all the time now. So that's a big part of it. And how did these kids, I mean, these young kids, like, one of the things I hear from kids all the time, and it started probably in mid-2000s, like 2005, I have an ideal.
You mean that they're waiting for things to come together?
No, that what they meant was I have an idea.
Oh.
They say I have an ideal. So you would correct them on that. No, I have an ideal. That's not what that word means. Look at the difference between an ideal and idea. But they argue. And it doesn't
So you're
matter.
saying we're moving closer to idiocracy is basically.
And I see it even more now. I mean, we all had our slang we use in different, when we were, middle school or early high school. But at the end of the day, there was this thing called a dictionary.
Oh, good.
And that was the steadfast
Right.
rule of all.
Yeah.
And then I believe it's between 2009 and 2011, the definition of fascism changed.
Okay.
They changed it.
Okay.
So unless you have like a hard copy of 2009 or older,
Yeah.
you can't prove it's different because if you're basing it on electronic,
Right.
which
right,
can be
right.
swiped in a blink
Yep.
of an eye, kind of like Wikipedia. But this is what's happening because words no longer have meaning. How often do we hear, "Gotta protect our democracy," or I've been accused of trying to destroy our democracy. Well, you're kind of right. I am because I don't live in one. You don't either.
Yeah.
You
I
live
know
in
what you're saying.
You live in a republic. You don't
Right.
live in a constitution or a democracy. Nowhere in the Constitution does that word appear. But they don't know that.
Well, and I mean, so that point being as it may, what I like to point to is the fact that they're complete hypocrites on that point. And we that's how our conversation started off, right? Is that they don't actually care about the legitimacy of democratic processes at all in any way. What they care about is power, and appeals to democracy are a means to power. They don't care about democracy as such. Like even just like the pure democracy that you're talking about. If 50% plus one of the population, for instance, in a given state, a state puts up, I mean, go back a few years, a state puts up a constitutional amendment before the Supreme Court decision overturned it, saying we're going to do traditional marriage in this state. 50% plus one vote for it. Did the Democrats respect that? Did they respect democracy? Of course not. They're going to push back against it, right? If right now Arizona had a state Supreme Court decision that said that we're going to defer back to this abortion legislation from back in the day. Are the Democrats respecting that? Did Joe Biden come out in the Rose Garden and say, "Well, the people have spoken in the state of Arizona, and because I'm such a proponent of democracy, even though I disagree with what they decided, I have to uphold it because I believe in the people, gosh darn it." No, that's not what he said, right? They don't care about democracy at all. It's a bunch of garbage.
So to that, I want to touch on one other little part here. And they don't care.
Yeah.
Because the rule of law, the definition of words, is all out the door right now. And this goes to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dexter's case in New York. He was charged for having non-serialized firearms. and then he went to court probably 2-3 weeks ago, and he was convicted. So he's been remanded to Rikers Island pending sentencing. These guns never left his house ever, and he's early 50s-ish black male engineer, just likes figuring out stuff, right? And the reason I bring that up is because that then, prior to his court date a couple weeks back, he had become aware of the case here in Sherburne County, Minnesota, with Walker Anderson.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And every time somebody got him on the air, he would bring up Walker's case. Because he's like, hey, I don't know how mine's going to go, but here we got a young man, 22 years old, what have you. And so talk about a gracious soul. I mean, he's facing a massive uphill push. And now, being convicted of this, I mean, it'll go to appeals court, and eventually it'll make it to the Supreme Court, and he'll probably likely be he'll be fine. But look at all the money, look at all the time. I mean, this is like a huge thing.
Yeah.
But he took the time to always point out Walker. So the reason I bring this up, Walker was just at my house the other day. He was helping me fix my Bobcat, and because that's what he does. He's a mechanic because he likes to play with things, right? But he is in the same boat. He made himself 2 non-serialized firearms, and where that leads to then is on what day are we on? We're on Sunday. So Friday, a really, really good doctor had sent me a message and a link. This is a doctor who has been federally indicted for allegedly giving 1,937 people saline instead of the COVID shot based on their request. This was back in 2021. Okay? And so, to my knowledge, he's the only one I know of that's been federally indicted. And so what he sent me, I'm looking for it here, was the copy from the United States Attorney's Office, handling it in that particular jurisdiction, motion to preclude necessity defense.
And what does that mean?
29 pages of like a whole bunch of stuff. Or something like that. What it says in there, so he cannot call forward any of the patients he gave it to and to have them give their explanation why they wanted that. He cannot call anybody that has been injured by taking the shot. He cannot have anybody, any other professional witnesses, I mean, medical people, of what they've witnessed, like of people that they've been dealing with that have been injured.
Yeah.
They are literally stripping him of any ability to defend himself for what he did.
Right.
And why he did it.
Yeah.
And I've got to know this gentleman. And so, but I look at this in the same light. I look at this that the federal government's coming down on anything they don't agree with, or you did not follow our narrative.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you didn't respect my authority. Yeah.
You didn't comply.
Right.
And this is where, I mean, I know they're 2 very separate issues, but I see it all tied together. There's actually information coming out right now. China hired, it's ironic, 87,000 people to go inspect farmers to make sure they're only planting what the government says they can plant. But the number is interesting. It's 87,000 because just a few years ago, the Biden administration wanted to hire 87,000 IRS agents.
Sure.
I don't know what's so magical about that number, but I find that interesting. But and then a farmer was arrested because they planted bananas and not sugarcane. Because he was told that, or they were told they had to plant sugarcane, but he chose to plant bananas. So, what I see out of all this, and I see all this energy policy and this agricultural policy, there was a bill in committee from Representative is it Hansen? It's Hansen, right? Environmental guy, that would prohibit or very strictly limit use of fertilizers, and even his own members in his own committee that he chairs would not pass it. He had to pull it. But, like, who knows how to farm better than a farmer?
Hansen, apparently.
Apparently.
Yeah.
But, and there's so many studies that show otherwise of all the talking points. And right. So what I see is heavy hand coming down from everywhere on failure to comply. And if we don't figure that out soon, we're going to be in a...
Well,
really unique situation.
And again, it's so hypocritical coming from them, because what do we hear from them in response to, say, a police officer on the street asking for compliance in a situation where they have the lawful authority to do so? Nothing but excuses. Oh, that's oppressive. Oh, you're...
What about the one which was the district attorney or something that was just, she refused to stop?
Yes.
She pulls into her own garage.
Yes.
And she said, well, you know who's going to prosecute this? That would be me. So I
Right.
didn't care. I don't need to stop. I mean, I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
But
yeah.
the video's
It's
out
good to
there.
be the king is basically her
Oh,
pitch.
and
Yeah.
and then she's calling whoever this officer's boss is, going, can you, this is dumb. And, you need to talk to your boss. I don't know if it's the police chief or a commanding officer or whatever. Supervisory officer, whatever they call him. But, literally, she thought she was so much above and beyond.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was one a couple years ago, too. It was a assistant prosecuting attorney that refused to stop and then chewed the cop's ass out. But this is, literally the mindset that rules for but not for me. And,
Well, and I'll tell you what else it's the mindset of. Jim Crow. Because that's what that was all about. Next Sunday, May 5th, Shiloh Temple, North Minneapolis, we're going to have Clarence Henderson coming into town. I just finalized his travel arrangements today. And he's going to be talking to a crowd there about his participation in the Woolworth's lunch counter protest back in the day, and then kind of tie that into some things that are going on now with Child Protective Services and the ways in which Black people are continuing to get the crap into the stick in certain areas of government policy. And so, I mean, I'm a big fan of consistency, right? So if you're going to say that it's really super duper important to follow government authority because it's government authority, then you don't get to sit here and live action role play about how wonderful you would have been back during, I don't know, chattel slavery or Jim Crow,
Right.
or under Nazi Germany with the Jews being persecuted and shuttled into cattle cars and what have you. Because you've demonstrated through your current modern actions in the face of current modern government overreach that you're just a tool of the state, and that you're going to go along with anything that a authority says ought to take place or that a person ought to concede to, regardless of whether or not it's legitimate. And this is where, when we get these tension points in society, the reason why we get them is because, you've got this one line, which is the law, and you've got this other line, which is legitimacy, which is defined by objective morality. What is true, what is right, what is righteous, what is good. And when those two things are aligned, you have peace. When they start to diverge, you get revolution, you get chaos, you get civil unrest. And that's what we've seen in the past, whether you're talking about, and this is the stuff that, it's become increasingly apparent to me as I've engaged with the Black community, that some of the narrative of what gets woven into wokeism and critical race theory has a significant nugget of truth to it, right? So when the Constitution of the United States was formulated and ratified, and it failed to address the issue of slavery, that was a divergence between law and legitimacy. And we ended up paying the price for it in the Civil War. And similarly with Jim Crow and all of that. And so what conservatives, what our side, the way we err is by ignoring that divergence and saying, it's fine. We fixed it, it's fine. And what the other side does is they use that divergence as a wedge to try to create further division.
Correct. And
right?
What do you think is going to happen out of the transgender affirming care bill from last year, which is a major wedge issue between people? You're talking about kids.
Yep.
So this is going to become so let's say you're a very moral, compassed male or female officer, and you come across one of these scenarios where now this kid has been brought across state lines against their parents' will, and every ounce of your soul says this is wrong.
Right.
But what they passed and signed into law last year says they really can't do anything about it. Where is their next move now? We are the ones that make the laws. We did not vote for it, by the way.
Of course not.
But just to make it clear, and yet they passed this under their trifecta. And this puts a lot of people in moral conflict.
You got it.
You have the atheists on one side, the Christians on another, the Jewish over here, the Muslims over there, and they don't seem to care about any of them. They don't care about. I mean, we saw that in the one committee hearing,
Right?
Where
You're talking about the Human Rights Act and
yes,
the Niska's Amendment.
But
and all
they
that.
literally threw all of them under the bus, which
Yeah.
I was surprised about.
Oh yeah.
That they actually like went after all of them. But and so it's either it's our way or it's no way, and then they're going to make a sting, and that goes back to what we were talking about before. But at the end of the day, what I see is all this is coming down because we see the same bills coming from being heard in multiple states, and actually in multiple countries. There's a lot of stuff going on in Canada right now that's pretty amazing, which is very similar. So this is coming from somewhere much bigger, and sadly, too many people, I think, are falling victim to not realizing. If we're going to blame social media that we have the ability to know too much, some people need to start learning a little bit more.
Well, and so
To draw the comparisons between what's going on right now in Canada, what's going on right now in Germany, what's going on, what just happened in Sri Lanka,
right.
a year and a half ago, and look at how they pulled back. Look what's going on in different parts of the UK. But, I mean, because it's all the same thing. And if you actually take a step back and look at it,
yeah,
you'll see. Look at the scenarios. Why is it we had, what was it? Occupy. Was that back in, it was back in 16, was it not? Right around there? 15, 16? With the Occupy?
I think it was a little bit earlier than that.
It was going into that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we had all the Antifa, BLM
Yep.
stuff in 2020
Yep.
kind of stuff. And we had the whole pandemic stuff. And now we got this whole pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine stuff in 2024. You notice the pattern here?
Every time there's an election, we got to have unrest.
Especially a presidential election.
Yeah.
It makes one wonder, like, how is this all so well planned out? And,
Sure.
And how is it? Look at some of these occupations in these colleges. Where do you find these $900 tents? And they're all the same color, but they all have, like, if we all went out, like you went to REI, I went to Walmart, whatever, right? Whatever. We all gonna go buy a tent. We have a Zoom call or whatever. We have a meeting somewhere. Okay, we all gotta go to our own tent. But how do you have 65 of the exact same tent?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, we just got done talking about how kids aren't in a big hurry to go out and buy themselves cars, but apparently they're in a big hurry to go buy themselves a tent so that they can sleep overnight in a place that they can't drive to. That's where we find ourselves.
And like literally some of them, because you could see the label on them. The manufacturer. These like $900 tents. Like, I wouldn't buy a $900 tent. I mean, if I'm gonna be dumb enough to go live in a tent, it better be pretty damn mild. Because if it's anything more than mild, I'm going in a hard shell. I'm not a soft shell chocolate at that moment. Nope. I want I don't want to get wet. I don't want to wake up with everything wet.
Right.
I don't want hail to hit me. I don't want tree branches to crush me. It's just not my thing. And I don't want a raccoon or a skunk or a bear or any of this stuff that could easily chew or claw its way through. It's not my world. I try to minimize my drama in my world. But
it was an odd choice then to become a politician, because that's a pretty good metaphor for what we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, but when I'm sleeping, that's why I don't protect. I don't agree with the Safe Storage Act, because, literally, I tried to convince a friend that he needed to order me up some design boxers with belt loops so I could not have to keep my gun on my nightstand, but I could just keep it on my boxers without my boxers falling down.
Yeah. Man, well, yeah, we're heading into a hell of a week, and we're going to
be a long one.
It's going to be a long one, probably some long nights, given what they are throwing at us and the context in which they're throwing it at us. And it's going to be a fascinating tightrope to walk, to figure out how we can make the points that need to be made about what they're doing, without becoming the story. But man, this is just absolutely nuts what we're facing this week. And we'll have plenty to talk about next week, so people should tune in.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
All right.
We'll see you.
The Hudson-Mekeland Podcast, with hosts and Minnesota State Representatives Walter Hudson and Shane Mekeland. Follow, subscribe, like, and share to show your support. On X, find Walter at Walter Hudson and Shane at Shane Mekeland, spelled Mekeland.